There is a kind of silence that is not peace. It is expectation, a void waiting to be filled, not by sound, but by an event. It was this silence that welcomed Leo and his family to Shadow Ridge Farm. They had fled the incessant buzz of the city, a cacophony of sirens and anxiety that had become the soundtrack of their lives. They sought isolation as a remedy, a promise of a new beginning whispered by the wind through the trees. The inheritance left by a great-uncle Leo barely knew seemed like a gift from fate, a vast stretch of land and a house that promised to be a sanctuary. But when they stepped out of the car, the silence that enveloped them was not welcoming. It was heavy, ancient, a silence that seemed to watch, judge, and guard secrets the land refused to surrender. The house was less a dwelling and more a witness to time, a skeleton of dark wood rising against the sky, with windows that looked like empty eyes, and a porch that groaned like a lament with every step. The paint, once white, now flaked away, revealing wood aged by decades of sun and rain. Every floorboard, every ceiling beam, seemed to have absorbed the stories, the joys, and, above all, the sorrows of all who had lived there. To Leo's wife, Helena, it was a project. To their young son, Samuel, it was a haunted castle. To Leo, it was an enigma. He felt the weight of history in every room, an invisible presence following him, a legacy that went far beyond physical property. In the first days, the quiet was the most dominant and disturbing feature. It wasn't the absence of city noise. It was the absence of everything. Birds seemed to avoid the skies above the property. The hum of insects was strangely muted, and the wind, when it blew, seemed to hold its breath as it passed the house. The family began speaking in lower tones, as if afraid to break a fragile spell. Every sound they themselves made, the scrape of a chair, Samuel's brief cry, the click of a light switch, echoed disproportionately, like a stone tossed into a perfectly still lake. It was an oppressive silence, one that amplified thoughts and made solitude palpable, a constant and unwelcome companion. It was on a gray afternoon, with rain threatening outside, that Leo decided to explore the house's final refuge, the attic. The folding ladder protested with a sharp groan, releasing a cloud of dust that danced in the beams of light from the single window. The air up there was dense, smelling of dry wood, decomposing paper, and stagnant time. Furniture covered with white sheets looked like ghosts seated in eternal vigil. Cardboard boxes collapsed under the weight of their own forgotten contents. It was a mausoleum of memories, an archive of past lives no one had bothered to organize or discard. Leo walked slowly, his steps raising small clouds of dust, feeling like an intruder in a forgotten sanctuary. And then he saw it. In a dark corner, almost completely hidden beneath a tattered tarp, was an object unlike the others. It wasn't a covered piece of furniture or a cardboard box. It was a trunk, a dark wooden trunk, reinforced with strips of blackened, rusted iron. It wasn't large, but its solid construction gave it an aura of importance and permanence. The dust upon it was so thick it looked like gray velvet. At its center, a heavy, ornate iron lock, no key in sight, guarded its contents with silent stubbornness. Leo knelt, brushing away the dust with his hand. The wood was cold. He ran his fingers over the lock, feeling the icy metal against his skin. It wasn't just an old object. It was a locked secret, waiting, a silent inheritance. The creak of metal against aged wood broke the attic's silence. With one final effort, the lock gave way, and the heavy lid opened with a long, dusty groan. A rush of stale air, scented with cedar, old paper, and something subtly floral, escaped from within. Leo's eyes scanned the contents, a treasure of forgotten memories. There were letters tied with faded silk ribbons, a silver locket that refused to open, and a leather-bound diary with pages stuck together by dampness. But what immediately captured his attention, nestled atop worn crimson velvet, was an object that seemed almost new by comparison. It was a music box, made of dark, nearly black wood, polished to a shine that dust couldn't fully dull. The sides were adorned with delicate, intricate carvings of twisted vines that seemed to writhe toward the top. On the lid, the solitary figure of a bird, perhaps a nightingale, was engraved with striking precision, its beak slightly open as if mid-song. There was no visible lock, only a small silver crank on the side, equally cold to the touch. The object exuded an aura of elegance and melancholy, a piece of art that seemed to hold more than just a musical mechanism. Curiosity outweighed any premonition. Leo picked up the box. It was heavier than he expected. His fingers turned the silver crank, feeling the smooth resistance of the internal gears being wound. The clicking sounds were crisp in the oppressive silence. He released the crank, and after the briefest pause, the music began. It wasn't a cheerful lullaby or a classic waltz. It was a simple melody, its notes crystalline and solitary, carrying the weight of profound longing. Each note lingered in the air a moment too long, creating a haunting harmony that echoed through the attic beams and seeped into his soul. He listened until the end, until the final note dissipated in the suspended dust. The mechanism stopped with a soft click, and silence returned, denser than before. Fascinated, Leo gently closed the lid, the carved bird now mute. He decided to take only that object for now, leaving the rest of the trunk for another day. He descended the creaking stairs and placed the music box on his bedside table, a peculiar relic of an unknown past. Night fell over the farm, bringing a darkness and silence that seemed absolute, swallowing the house whole. Hours later, Leo was jolted awake by a sound. At first it was so faint he thought it part of a dream, but then it grew clearer, unmistakable. From above, it was the melody, the same sequence of solitary, melancholic notes floating through the floorboards, descending directly from the attic. A cold shiver ran down his spine. His eyes darted to the bedside table, where the silhouette of the music box lay in the dim light, motionless and silent. He knew, with paralyzing certainty, that he had closed it. The crank had not been touched, and yet the forgotten song was playing again, not beside him, but where he had found it, like an echo refusing to die. The second night was almost an identical repetition of the first, a ghostly echo confirming Leo's suspicion. This was no dream. The melody descended from the attic right on time, as if conducted by an invisible maestro, its thin, mournful piano notes slicing through the farm's dense silence. This time, the initial shock gave way to a strange, paralyzing curiosity. He lay still in bed, eyes fixed on the dark ceiling, mapping each note in his mind. There was no distortion, no sign the sound came from a radio or a distant neighbor. The acoustics were too perfect, too intimate. It was as if a tiny porcelain ballerina were slowly turning just a few meters above his head, dancing for an audience of one in the dead of night. The music was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was becoming a certainty, a disturbing constant in his new life. On the third night, something changed. The melody began at the same hour, with the same crystalline clarity, but a new element was woven into the notes. Whispers. At first, they were so subtle, Leo thought it was leaves brushing the window, or the hum of blood in his ears. But as he focused, ignoring the familiar music, he could discern them. Distinct voices, a low, constant murmur rising and falling with the melody's cadence. They didn't form comprehensible words, sounding more like a conversation muffled by a thick wall. Multiple sounds overlapped, creating a vocal texture that was both human and utterly alien. The air in his room seemed to freeze instantly. The music box wasn't just playing by itself. It seemed to be trying to communicate, or perhaps transmit, an ancient conversation trapped in an eternal loop. The next morning at the breakfast table, Leo tried to explain. His voice, still trembling from a sleepless night, described the nocturnal music and the new whispers accompanying it. His mother smiled, the tired smile of someone unpacking for days, and ruffled his hair. She said old houses had their own songs, that the wind whistled through eaves and window cracks, creating strange melodies. His father, practical and direct, agreed. It was just the wood settling, old pipes creaking with temperature changes, the sounds of the house breathing, nothing more. They didn't ridicule him, but the condescension in their tones was clear. To them, it was a boy's imagination in a new, scary place. Leo's isolation deepened. He wasn't just hearing something they didn't. He was living a reality they refused to even consider. The nights that followed turned routine into a ritual of apprehension. The melody and whispers became his nocturnal companions. The murmurs, though still unintelligible, seemed to gain inflection, at times a lament, at others urgent, almost like a desperate warning. The very nature of the music seemed to shift with this new layer. What had once been merely melancholic now sounded laden with ancient pain, an untold story pulsing through the walls. By day, the house seemed to guard the night's secret. Every creaking board, every shadow moving at the corner of his eye felt connected to that sound. The farm was no longer silent. It was a place that waited for darkness to speak, and Leo was the only one listening. Then one night, lying in the dark enveloped by the supernatural symphony from the attic, a new sensation replaced fear, determination. His parents would not believe him. No one would investigate the noises stealing his sleep and peace. He was alone in this. The logic was simple and terrifying. The music, the whispers, all of it had begun the moment he opened that trunk and wound the small wooden box. The source of it all was up there, waiting in the dark. Passivity was no longer an option. He could no longer just listen. He had to see. The decision was made in a moment of frightening clarity. The next night, he wouldn't wait for the music to start. He would go to it. He would climb to the attic and confront the music box. The melody had ceased, but the whispers still echoed in his mind. Leo knew he could no longer ignore them. Fear was an icy current, but the need to understand was stronger. He climbed the stairs to the attic again, each creaking step sounding like a warning. The dim light of the single bulb cast long, dancing shadows over piles of clutter. The trunk was there, ajar, exactly as he had left it. For a moment, he hesitated to approach the music box, but his gaze was drawn to something else, something partially hidden beneath an old yellowed sheet. Driven by morbid curiosity, he knelt and pulled the fabric aside, revealing the rest of its contents. His trembling hands met the chill of porcelain. It was a doll, perhaps 16 inches tall, dressed in lace that had once been white, now stained by time. Its blonde hair, made of synthetic strands, was tangled and tied with a faded ribbon. A thin red smile was painted on its lips, a fixed and unnatural expression. But it was the eyes that seized Leo's attention. They were a glassy blue, deep and lifeless, and both were cracked. A spiderweb of fractures spread across the right iris, distorting the pupil and making it look as if it were viewing the world through a broken mirror, guarding a secret. At that moment, a child's voice broke the silence. "What did you find?" Anna, his 6-year-old sister, stood at the attic entrance, wide, curious eyes fixed on the doll. Where Leo saw decay and a disturbing aura, Anna saw a forgotten treasure. She approached slowly, fascination written on her face. "She's beautiful," she whispered, reaching out to touch the lace dress. Leo instinctively recoiled as if shielding his sister from an invisible danger. "Don't touch it, Anna. It's old, strange." But his words had no effect. Anna was already completely enchanted, her fingers tracing the doll's painted smile. He tried to argue, to explain the discomfort the object caused him, but to a child his fears sounded like selfishness. "Please, Leo, I'll take care of her. Her name will be Lena." Leo's protests faded under her insistence and pleading eyes. Defeated, he watched her take the doll in her arms, cradling it with maternal care that contrasted terribly with the toy's sinister appearance. He stood helpless as Anna descended the stairs, carrying that piece of cracked porcelain to the safety of her room. The attic suddenly felt colder, darker, filled with emptiness. Night fell, and with it a heavy stillness settled over the house. Leo lay in bed, eyes open in the dark, every creak of old wood making him flinch. He tried to convince himself it was just a doll, a harmless toy. Then he heard it, a faint dragging sound in the hallway. He held his breath, heart pounding. Slowly he sat up, staring at the crack beneath his door. And then he saw her. In the hallway, dimly lit by moonlight through a window, the doll sat on the floor. Anna's bedroom door stood ajar behind it, but the doll wasn't facing it. Its porcelain head was turned and its cracked glass eyes were fixed, unmistakably, on Leo's door. Leo's scream echoed through the silent house, bringing his groggy parents into the hallway. But the scene he pointed to had already dissolved. The doll was no longer on the floor. Anna, awakened by the noise, held it tightly in her arms, tears in her eyes. She sobbed that Lelia, the name she'd given the doll, had fallen from the bed and she was just putting her back. The explanation was plausible, childishly logical. Relieved, his parents scolded Leo for frightening his sister and sent him back to bed. But he knew what he had seen. It wasn't a fallen doll. It was a sentinel, a motionless watchguard whose cracked glass eyes seemed to pierce the darkness straight into his soul. From that night on, normalcy in the house began to fray at the edges, subtly and almost imperceptibly to everyone but him. The incidents started small, almost comical in their triviality. A set of colored pencils Anna always kept in a tin appeared perfectly aligned on her desk in the morning. The small wooden carousel on her dresser, broken for years, suddenly spun slowly for a few seconds when someone entered the room. The parents chalked it up to a child's imagination or chance. But Leo noticed a pattern. Every event, no matter how minor, happened in the silent presence of the doll Lilia. She was always there, seated on a small wicker chair in the corner, her porcelain head slightly tilted, as if assessing the scene. The atmosphere in Anna's room changed, becoming heavy, charged with a quiet that felt more like a pause than peace. That was when the sad lady appeared. Leo began hearing Anna whispering for long stretches in her room, one-sided conversations lasting through the afternoon. When confronted, Anna explained with unsettling simplicity that she was talking to her new friend, a friend who lived inside Lilia. "She's the sad lady," Anna said one day, "because she lost her music." To the parents, it was the height of childish creativity, a way of coping with loneliness in a new house. They even found the story charming. But to Leo, every mention of the sad lady was like a nail being hammered in. The entity that once whispered through the music box now had a name, a personality, and most terrifying of all, a direct line of communication with his little sister. Leo's obsession solidified. He needed proof. He began conducting small experiments, trying to capture the impossible. He spread a thin layer of flour on the floor in front of the doll's chair, only to find it untouched in the morning, though the doll seemed to be in a slightly different position. He took photos with his phone, comparing the angle of the doll's head night after night, searching for discrepancies always too small to be conclusive. His actions made him irritable and distant. Tension with Anna erupted into arguments, with her accusing him of being jealous of her friend. To their parents, the problem was no longer a creepy doll, but their older son's increasingly paranoid behavior. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Tired of failing, Leo decided to watch. He hid in the darkness of the hallway, eyes fixed on the sliver of light escaping beneath Anna's door. Hours passed in tense silence. Nothing. Just as he was about to give up, the door slowly opened. Anna stood there, her small face serious in the gloom. She looked directly at him, without surprise, as if she'd known he was there all along. Her voice, when she spoke, was a cold whisper that sliced through the silence. "Leo, you have to stop," she said. "The sad lady doesn't like you watching. She says you make her nervous." Anna's words echoed in the oppressive silence of the house, turning every shadow into a hostile observer. "The sad lady doesn't like you watching." It was no longer a childish warning. It was a sentence. The doll, now a sentinel in his sister's room, was untouchable, enemy territory guarded by a loyalty he could not break. The diary, with its cryptic pages, offered more questions than answers, a maze of madness he feared to re-enter. Cornered, fear solidifying in his chest, Leo knew inaction was the quickest path to insanity. There was only one piece left in the puzzle, one last thread of hope or doom at the bottom of that cursed trunk. He needed control, a weapon, anything that made him feel less like prey and more like a hunter. The climb to the attic was different this time. There was no trembling curiosity, only a heavy, somber determination. The air felt denser. The dust on the floor recorded his steps as if the house were memorizing his movements. He ignored the empty space where the doll had been and the diary lying nearby. His focus was on the third and final object, partially wrapped in faded velvet. With trembling hands, he pulled it into the dim light. It was a hand mirror, elegant and ancient. The frame, probably silver, was nearly black with age, coated in a patina of neglect. The glass was so dirty and clouded it barely reflected light, looking more like a gray slate than a mirror. It was heavy, surprisingly so, and cold to the touch, a cold that seemed to emanate from within. Carrying the artifact to his room, the only place that still felt like a sanctuary, Leo began what became a ritual. With a soft cloth and some polish, he worked on the silver frame. Slowly, the dark oxidation gave way, revealing not the florals he expected, but intricate, disturbing engravings. Vines, yes, but with disproportionate thorns, intertwined with what looked like serpents or thin tentacles. With each inch revealed, a sense of profanation grew. Then he turned to the glass. Carefully, he wiped away decades of grime, dust, and time. The surface began to clear, but the reflection that emerged wasn't sharp. It was distorted, like the surface of dark, still water, an imperfect reflection of an imperfect world. Cleaning it felt less like restoration and more like violation, as if he were waking something that had been sleeping deeply. He lifted the mirror, now clean, and stared at himself. His pale, tense face stared back. For an instant, relief washed over him. It was just a mirror. A beautiful, old mirror. He forced a breath, trying to relax his shoulders. And then it happened. He blinked. And his reflection did not. For a fraction of a second, perhaps less, the eyes in the mirror stayed open, fixed on him, before finally closing, a beat too late. Air froze in his lungs. He shook his head, blaming fatigue, paranoia. He looked again, staring hard, daring the image to betray him once more. He kept his face perfectly still, a mask of neutrality, but at the corners of his reflection's mouth, a subtle, almost imperceptible curve formed, a phantom smile, a smile he had not made. The terror changed shape. It was no longer a doll in the hallway or imaginary whispers. It was personal, inescapable. It was trapped on the other side of the glass, wearing his own face as a disguise. He dropped the mirror onto the bed as if it burned, backing into the opposite wall. The fear he'd felt before was of something external, something he could theoretically lock away or flee from. But how do you run from yourself? Every reflective surface in his room, the dark window, the blank monitor screen, the polished metal of a lamp, became a potential portal to that wrong version of him. Paranoia deepened into a crisis of identity. That reflection wasn't just a distorted image. It was a presence, a consciousness watching him from his own face. And the terrifying question that arose in his mind wasn't "what is this?" but "which of us is real?" The horror didn't remain confined to that small silver mirror. It spread like ink on paper, contaminating every reflective surface in the house. The bathroom mirror, the dark window at night, the black screen of the television. Leo began seeing things. Not clear hallucinations, but fleeting glimpses, anomalous movements in the periphery of his own image. A shadow stretching wrong, a tall, slender silhouette standing behind his shoulder for a split second before vanishing when he tried to focus. It was subtle torture, an assault on his perception of reality. He found himself staring at his reflection for long minutes, heart in his throat, waiting for the next anomaly. The figure never fully revealed itself. It existed only on the threshold between what he saw and what he thought he saw. The house, once his refuge, was now a labyrinth of mirrors, and in each one, he felt he was no longer alone. He tried to fight it with logic. It was stress, lack of sleep, his growing obsession with the doll and the trunk. His mind, he told himself, was playing tricks. But logic unraveled with each new sighting. The figure seemed to grow bolder. Once, walking down the hallway, he glimpsed in the reflection of a framed picture a pale, thin hand resting on his shoulder. He felt a phantom chill at that exact spot, a shiver of ice down his spine. He spun around. Nothing. The hallway was empty and silent. Fear began to transform into something deeper, corrosive doubt about his own sanity. What if there was nothing there? What if it was all happening only in his head? That uncertainty was, in some ways, more terrifying than any real ghost. The possibility of losing touch with reality was an abyss opening at his feet, and he felt himself losing balance. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. He was in the bathroom, water running, steam lightly fogging the mirror. As he leaned forward to wash his face, he looked up, and there it was. For a full second, clear and unmistakable, a pale, emaciated face stared at him over his shoulder. Not a shadow, not a blur. Hollow eyes, a mouth open in a silent scream, skin stretched over bone in a sickening way. Leo's scream was real. He stumbled back, slamming into the door, eyes locked on the mirror where now only his own terrified reflection stared back. Air deserted him. His heart felt ready to burst. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't imagination. He had seen it, and the image of that agonized face was now seared into his mind, a memory that would haunt him forever. Desperate, he called his parents. Voice choked with panic, he dragged them to the bathroom, pointing at the mirror with a trembling hand. It was there, right behind me. Didn't you see it? They looked at the mirror, then at him, and the expression on their faces wasn't fear but deep concern. "Leo, son, there's no one there," his mother said softly, the tone used to calm a frightened child. His father placed a hand on his forehead, checking for fever. "You need to rest. This whole story is getting to you." Each word of comfort stabbed his sanity. They didn't see. They didn't believe. To them, the monster wasn't in the mirror. The problem was in their son's mind. Leo was utterly alone in his terror, isolated by the disbelief of those he loved most. The figure in the mirror didn't need to touch him to destroy him. It was doing so by turning him into a madman in his family's eyes. It's a feeling you might know. That sudden shiver when you pass a dark hallway and, from the corner of your eye, swear you saw something move. That hesitation to look at your own reflection in a window at night, afraid of what might appear behind you. It's a nearly universal human experience, a primal fear that our own image may hide a dark secret. How many times have you felt you weren't alone, even in the safety of your home? Leave your story in the comments, because for Leo, that ancient fear ceased to be a mere sensation. The figure in the reflection was no longer a maybe. It was a promise, a constant presence watching him from a place he could never escape, the other side of the mirror. And it was only beginning to reveal itself. Leo's paranoia, once confined to the mirror, overflowed, contaminating the air he breathed. The silence of night was no longer refuge, but a blank canvas for horror. And it came as a sound, a thin, delicate, and terrifyingly familiar melody, the notes of the music box. At first he dismissed it as an auditory ghost of his exhausted mind. But the sound persisted, gaining substance, a metallic, fragile presence. Most disturbing wasn't the melody, but its origin. It didn't come from his room. It came from the hallway. It came from Anna's room. He rose, heart pounding. In his hand, fused to his skin by cold sweat, was the silver mirror, his shield and his curse. He moved slowly to the doorway, each step a battle against the urge to retreat. Standing at the threshold, he looked down the dark hall, from which the childish melody flowed with terrifying clarity. By morbid habit, he lowered his gaze to the mirror. What he saw reflected, however, was not the hallway ahead. It was his own bedroom behind him. And sitting on his bed, glass eyes fixed on him, was the porcelain doll. Shock froze the air in his lungs. The doll wasn't physically there. He would have felt it. It existed only in that small silver window, a paradox tearing at reality. As his mind processed the impossibility, the whispers changed. No longer static, they unified, focused, and a single word emerged. Elisa. If you've ever felt a chill from a sound that seemed to come from nowhere, leave a like. The name was whispered into his mind, an intimate, icy invasion. Elisa, again and again, a funereal mantra. Anna's melody, the doll's reflection, the whispered name. The three anomalies converged into a single point of terror. The puzzle pieces snapped together in his mind with a sickening click. The trunk, the three objects. They were never separate curses. They were fragments of an entity, pieces of a tragic story. The music box, the mirror, and the doll were not the source of the evil. They were its conduits, its anchors in this world. The realization struck him. He wasn't haunted by things, but by a presence using them as eyes and voice. With a muffled sound, Leo let the mirror fall onto the carpet. The doll's reflection blinked and vanished. At the same instant, the melody ceased, plunging the house into deep silence. The outside world quieted, but the inner sound remained, louder than ever. The name, Elisa, no longer a whisper, but a declaration. He finally understood. The objects weren't haunted. They were echoes of a person's pain. They were Elisa's echoes, And now she had his full attention. Elisa. The name echoed in Leo's mind, a phantom word giving shape to the terror. The whispers, the melody, the reflection, all converged on that identity. His parents, wrapped in protective denial, saw only an exhausted boy on the brink of collapse. Logic and reason had crumbled, leaving him isolated in his own home. There was nowhere to run. Only one last, desperate attempt to understand remained. The answer, he felt with chilling certainty, was locked there, in that room, inside the wooden trunk that had started it all. With trembling hands, he lifted the heavy lid. The smell of cedar and stagnant time enveloped him. Once nostalgic, now suffocating. He had obsessively examined each object, the mirror, covered, the doll, locked away, the music box, silenced. What else could there be? He ran his fingers along the worn velvet lining, feeling every imperfection in the wood. He was no longer searching for a toy or relic. He sought a confession, an explanation, anything to make sense of the madness consuming his life. Then his fingers felt a protrusion, an irregularity at the trunk's bottom he'd ignored. Pressing it, a dull click revealed a secret compartment. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, lay the final item. It wasn't sinister but deeply personal. A small leather-bound diary worn by time. It lacked the cold aura of the others. Instead, Leo felt a different weight. The weight of history, of secrets kept, of an entire life contained in yellowed pages. He carried the diary to the desk, the lamp's light forming a circle of courage in the darkness. Opening it felt like the final transgression, a violation of privacy crossing time and death. But fear of the unknown was less than his visceral need for answers. With a breath, he opened it. The pages, fragile as moth wings, revealed elegant handwriting in faded blue ink. On the first page, a date, March 12, 1954. Below it, the words that stopped his heart. "My name is Elisa." Leo began to read, and the voice of a long-dead girl rose from the pages. Elisa wrote not of ghosts, but of loneliness on an isolated farm. She described lovingly her most cherished gifts, her mother's silver mirror, so she'd never feel alone, the porcelain doll, her only confidant, and the music box whose melody was her comfort. They were the same objects. The connection was undeniable. He turned the page, and the tone darkened with ominous premonition. "I loved this house," the last line he read said, "but joy was not meant to last. Not here. March 12th. Father says the harvest will be good, but I don't care about the corn. I love the silence when he goes to the fields. That's when I can open Mama's little box." The ballerina spins and spins, and the melody, it's like her voice, which I can barely remember. Before she left, she said that as long as the music played, a part of her would be here. I close my eyes and pretend she's in the room, singing to me. The box is my only friend, the only one who understands the silence that surrounds me, the only one who fills the void. April 19th. Today I received a gift. Father brought it from town, a porcelain doll with blue glass eyes and a silk dress. I named her Lily. She doesn't speak, of course, but I know she listens. I told her about Mama and how the village boys look at me sideways. Lily doesn't judge me. She just sits in her chair with her painted smile and listens. I told her we would be friends forever, a silent pact between the two of us. She is the only one who knows my secret. She will never leave. June 5th. The silver mirror arrived. It's heavy, with angels carved into the frame. Father hung it on the wall opposite my bed. It's strange to see myself so clearly. The girl in the mirror has my eyes, my hair, but she seems different, braver. I smile at her and she smiles back. We talk for hours. She's the only one who truly sees me, not just the quiet farmer's daughter. I wonder if she also feels lonely, trapped on the other side of the glass, waiting for company, just as I wait here. September 2nd. The walls of this room are my world. The fields outside are a green and brown blur. My family isn't flesh and bone. It's music, porcelain, and silver. The music box's melody isn't just sweet anymore. It cries with me on stormy nights. Lily no longer has a painted smile. Her glass eyes seem to carry the same sadness as mine. And the girl in the mirror, she understands. She nods when I speak of my loneliness. They are all I have. They are all I need. October 31st. Something is wrong. Last night I woke to the melody. The box was closed on the dresser, but I could swear I heard it faintly from inside the wood. And Lily. Her eyes seemed to follow me in the dark. In the morning, her dress was crooked, as if she had moved during the night. But the scariest thing was the mirror. For a second, when I looked, the girl on the other side wasn't smiling. Her face was empty, eyes dark and hollow. I'm afraid. Are my friends changing? Or is it me? The diary shifts abruptly, like a page torn out. One entry, dated during a harsh winter, speaks of silence, not peace, but absence. Elisa writes of the day her mother's laughter and father's deep voice vanished from the house, replaced by a hollow echo in long corridors. She doesn't detail what happened. Only the consequence, profound abandonment, the feeling of being a forgotten anchor at the bottom of an ocean of grief. The farm, once refuge, became her prison. It was in that silence that the thing began. Elisa calls it the shadow. At first it wasn't a form but a sensation. A sudden cold in the sewing room despite the fire, the smell of damp earth in the attic on a dry day. With trembling handwriting, she describes feeling watched while reading in the library, a vigilance that made her shrink. Loneliness was no longer empty. It was filled by a presence breathing dust and sorrow, a companion feeding on her pain. The music box, once her mother's sweet memory, became a herald. The familiar melody now sounded warped, and between the notes, Elisa began to hear whispers, fine as spider webs, clinging to her mind. At first they were comforting, promising she'd never be alone. The present spoke through the music, validating her suffering, claiming to understand her loss. The diary reveals fear, but also surrender. She longed for the melody, for in those whispers she found a perverse form of companionship. Then the shadow gained a face. In the silver mirror, Elisa first saw the sad lady, not her own reflection, a pale figure with long dark hair that seemed to float, eyes like wells of ancient melancholy. The woman in the mirror never spoke, only watched. Sometimes she mimicked Elisa's movements with a slight delay, like a visual echo. Other times she stood still, face twisted in silent pain, a specter mirroring Elisa's tormented soul. Isolated, with the shadow as her only company, Elisa clung to her last treasure, the porcelain doll. If the music box was the presence's voice and the mirror its face, the doll became its confidant. Pages fill with one-sided conversation. Elisa told the doll about the whispers and the sad lady, confessing her deepest fears to its glass eyes. The doll became a vessel, an object charged with the weight of her anguish, loneliness, and terror, a silent witness to her slow descent. Elisa's handwriting deteriorates. Letters once round and childish become jagged, frantic, nearly tearing the paper. She no longer speaks of sadness, but of an icy terror infiltrating the house's very wood, a cold not from winter outside. The cold no longer comes from the window, she writes, ink smeared by tears. It comes from the music box, from my doll's glass eyes. The whispers, once comforting, become commands, dark promises in a voice not her own, but echoing clearly in her mind. She describes a specific stormy night when the mirror shadow finally became clear. No longer a blur, but a slender figure with a face of timeless sorrow, superimposed over her own. There, reflected beside her terrified image, the entity made its offer, not a request, but salvation for a lonely soul. You will never be alone again, it promised, not aloud, but as a thought blooming warm and inviting. I will be your friend, your sister, your guardian. Just give me a place to stay. The pact wasn't sealed with blood, but with tears and desperation. Exhausted by loneliness, Elisa agreed. She recounts placing her hands on the music box, the doll, and the mirror, one by one, as the dark presence wrapped around her like cold silk. She felt her life force drain away, warmth flowing from her chest into the objects, leaving a permanent chill behind. In that moment, they ceased to be hers. They became anchors, metal, porcelain, and silver prisons for the entity sharing not only her room, but her existence. Loneliness vanished, as promised. But what replaced it was far worse, a constant vigilance, a suffocating weight in the air. The music box played its mournful tune at random hours, even shut tight. The doll's eyes seemed to carry a hungry intelligence, following her every move, and in the mirror, her reflection sometimes smiled when she did not. The entity fed on her fear, each sob strengthening it. The diary's final words are almost illegible, stained by what appears to be a long-dried tear. "I didn't want this," she writes. "She isn't my friend. She is my jailer. We are one now, bound to these walls, these objects. Innocence is gone, replaced by a late understanding of the bargain she made." The final page holds a single sentence, a warning, a curse for the future. "She promised that whoever finds them after me will stay here with us, forever, forever." The final word echoed in Leo's mind, not a childish threat, but a contract clause signed in desperation. The attic air grew heavier, colder. This wasn't the story of a lonely girl. It was an instruction manual for a trap patiently set, waiting for a new family. Elisa hadn't just died here. She'd become bait, the first piece in a macabre collection, and they, seeking a new beginning, had walked into the web's center. Like a key turning, the first piece clicked. The melody. He'd heard it early on, dismissed it as wind. Then he heard it again, from his sister's lips. Anna was humming it, sitting on the garden swing. The exact melody Elisa described. The song the shadow used to communicate. Leo's blood ran cold. Not coincidence. The entity wasn't just in the house. It was presenting itself to the family, using music as a bridge, a whispered invitation to a child's soul. The second piece, the whispers. Unexplained chills, sounds in the walls. He'd dismissed them as an old house's acoustics. Now he understood. They were probes, attempts at contact. Anna responded. He remembered finding her chatting with empty corners, laughing as if hearing a secret. He thought it was childish loneliness. How wrong he was. It wasn't a monologue. It was a dialogue. The sad lady in the mirror. Anna's imaginary friend. The images aligned with horrifying clarity. They were the same figure. Elisa's diary description and Anna's conversations overlapped perfectly. It wasn't imagination. It was a predator earning trust. The doll, the music box, the mirror weren't cursed objects. They were anchors, conduits forming a network. The entity wasn't bound to an object. It possessed the ecosystem of Elisa's pain. The final truth hit like a punch. The farm wasn't haunted. It was a soul trap. Elisa, in her loneliness, made a pact to never be alone, becoming the prison's guardian. The entity, fed by tragedy, was hungry again, and Anna, with her innocence, was the perfect target, the ideal replacement. It wasn't about ghosts of the past. It was present danger. The entity didn't want to scare them. It wanted Anna. Every minute there was a step closer to losing her forever. With the diary's final page burning in his mind, Leo's reality fractured. Forever wasn't a past curse. It was a present promise. Outside, the peaceful blue sky twisted into sickly gray and violet. The air grew heavy and electric, wind scratching windows like a caged animal. Leo ran through the house with the diary, trying to warn his parents. But his words were lost amid concern for the approaching storm. To Carlos and Helena, it was just weather turning. To Leo, it was the shadow's arrival, the beginning of the harvest. The first thunderclap didn't sound distant. It exploded overhead, shaking the floor. And at that exact flash, darkness won. Lights flickered once and died, plunging the farm into suffocating black. The silence that followed was worse than noise, a heavy vacuum lasting only a moment. Then it began. A delicate metallic sound, the music box melody. Not from Anna's room, but from everywhere. From walls, floor, air. A ghostly lullaby for the coming nightmare. Panic erupted. Carlos searched for flashlights. Helena tried calming Anna, who cried, not in fear, but confusion. "My friend went away," she sobbed. Leo's spine chilled. Ignoring his father's calls, he ran to Anna's room, phone screen lighting the way. The beam revealed a neatly made bed, and on the pillow where the porcelain doll should be, nothing. The window was locked from inside. The door was the only exit. The melody grew louder, distorted, as if the box's gears were rusted with sorrow. Helena screamed Anna's name, hysteria rising. Then, in the dark hallway, Carlos's flashlight swept over the large antique mirror. For a fraction of a second, it revealed a reflection belonging to none of them. A pale young woman with eyes like wells of darkness, mouth frozen in silent lament. The sad lady, the face Leo had seen, now inside their house, staring from another dimension. Leo screamed, pointing, begging them to look. But when the light focused again, the image vanished, replaced by their terrified reflections. They accused him of panicking, of letting the house's story get to him. But Leo knew what he'd seen. The entity wasn't hiding anymore. It was using the storm, the darkness, to manifest. The trap had closed. The night of harvest wasn't metaphor or legend. It was happening now, and they were the crop. The sound upstairs wasn't a house groaning. It was methodical, heavy, like furniture being dragged, or a body. Locked in the cellar, air reeking of damp earth and panic, Carlos's trembling flashlight cast mocking shadows. Anna whimpered softly, clinging to her mother. Leo, however, had a different look, not just fear, but understanding, the clarity of seeing the only suicidal way out. He knew what to do. The diary burned in his mind. The anchor. "I have to go up," Leo said. "The music box, the doll, the mirror, they're her chains." His father shook his head. "You're not going anywhere." But the argument died when a powerful blow struck the cellar door, not an attempt to enter, but a show of strength. The entity was done playing. The choice wasn't stay or flee. It was fight or be consumed. Before they could stop him, Leo unlocked the door and bolted upstairs. Cold air slammed into him. The house had changed. Shadows were thicker, clinging to corners. Silence pressed his ears. He ran to the living room, where the music box sat on the mantel. The metal was ice cold. Though silent, he heard its warped melody in his head. He grabbed it, one step done. Next, Anna's room, the door ajar, rhythmic whispers repeating her name. The porcelain doll lay in the center, head twisted impossibly, glass eyes fixed on him. When Leo picked it up, the whispering stopped. The last item, the mirror fragment, was in the hallway. As he approached, the reflection wasn't his. It was the sad lady, and she smiled. With all three items in his arms, he ran to the fireplace. As he hurled them into the flames, a clear, icy voice whispered at his ear, "You can't erase me." Flames roared, devouring wood, melting porcelain, consuming glass. A shrill, inhuman scream tore through the farm, shaking walls, ripping reality, and then, suddenly, everything stopped. Wind ceased. The storm vanished. Silence fell. Leo turned. Nothing remained. The oppressive presence was gone. But on the stone hearth, untouched by fire, a tiny shard of mirror gleamed. For a moment, he was sure he saw a pair of sad eyes watching him from within it. Was the curse broken, or merely asleep? The story of Shadow Ridge Farm is far from over. Subscribe and turn on notifications because what we uncover next will change everything.